Has anyone ever known a killer before they killed? What were they like? My family bought a house from a man who flipped houses for a living back when I was growing up. He was a nice man, married with grown kids. He would often come over for dinner and help me with minor repairs around the house. We moved away a few years later, and he wanted to buy the house back. Luckily, it was a cash deal, because soon after it all went through, he was arrested for child porn. When the cops raided his house, there was no sign of his wife. Upon looking into it, no one had seen or heard from her in months. Turns out, he had murdered her and buried her in their backyard. I sat next to that man at the dinner table as a child. Still haunts me. The younger brother of a girl I was friends with in middle school and high school. They had some struggles growing up, and I know their mother was an abusive relationship because we gave her some help getting away from her husband. As we connected many years later, and found out that the younger brother had murdered someone. Initially, it sounded pretty gruesome, but when I actually read court reports, I kind of felt bad for the kid. He had some mental illness issues, but as a teenager, apparently, he had been groomed by a much older man into a sexual relationship where the man provided money, shelter, and of course drugs. He was extremely controlling and abusive. Eventually, the kid tried to get away and was trying to start a new life with a girl he met, but this guy tracked him down and blackmailed him. Eventually, kid snapped and murdered him. I think I felt worse for the kid because a lot of people can't get away from their abusers. A few years ago, I hired a father-son handyman team to help me get my house ready to put on the market. Among other things, my outside doorknobs were in bad shape, so they installed new ones. The dad seemed pretty nice, even did a little bit for free. On their third and last day at my house, he was pretty fired up about a big job they were starting the next day. 3 days later, he killed his new clients because they were unhappy with his work. A neighbor saw what happened and ran into her house and hid. He kicked her door in and shot her too. I was terrified until he was caught. I graduated high school with Dr. Death, Chris Dunch. He was an asshole. He was charming with teachers and people could benefit him. He was awful to everybody else. I didn't see it, but one or more awkward and vulnerable classmates said he bullied him relentlessly, and I believed it. He was easily irritated, and if you got on his nerves, he would really lose his cool. Remarkably mean, and people would just shrug their shoulders and say, that's just how Chris is. In my first semester of college, I had a computer science professor I really loved. Near the end of the semester, he told us he may be taking time off and finding a replacement for the semester. His severely autistic son had died in a tragic pool accident. He noted that the media was trying to make him look bad. I created a GoFundMe for funeral expenses. He appreciated it and shared photos to use on the page. Fast forward half a year. I get calls from news reporters asking what my thoughts are. He had been arrested on suspected unintentional manslaughter. It turns out he had left his son outside in the cold by the pool unsupervised when he left for work. His son was never supposed to be unattended. His son was outside for who knows how long before the professor's daughter found the boy face down in the pool. Further research into the case revealed the boy was living in an unfurnished basement. Feces all over the walls, often left alone. The police were at the home frequently. CPS had made various safety requirements for them that they never followed. He's being charged with unintentional manslaughter and various forms of child abuse. Him and his wife are being charged for filling the boy's Ritalin prescription for many months after the death. I still believe it was intentional. Texts revealed the daughter discovered the boy when the professor texted her, asking her to check if Freak was okay. My little sister dated a guy when she was in high school who ended up murdering a couple he owed money to for heroin. This dude beat them with a fucking baseball bat and hammer. He almost got the death sentence, but ended up with life in prison with no possibility of parole. He was a seemingly nice, polite teenager. I used to drive him and my sister around for various dates and things. He was quiet, but not oddly so. He just seemed like a normal teenage boy. My best friend's older brother killed her stepmom, strangled her, and burned the house down. He was just like any other teenage older brother, a bit rebellious, but nothing out of the ordinary. He was kind of goth and liked heavy metal and had dark humor. He played GoldenEye with us and always let me use the see-through purple controller. He teased his little sister just like any brother would. One time he took us for a car ride and did donuts in a church parking lot while blasting a big, shiny Tunes album, and it was really fun. Nothing ever indicated what he would do later in life. He was an asshole. I'm not surprised he killed somebody. He killed a 65-year-old man in a revenge drive-by shooting. He shot at the wrong house. The guy he intended to kill didn't even live in that neighborhood. I went to high school with a girl who poisoned her father. No one knew until she confessed a year later, watching a Shakespeare play in college. She was a little weird in school, but I didn't think she was capable of that. She confessed to my cousin, by the way. Sheesh. My sister was killed by her fiancé. He was, well, normal. Took good care of her during recovery from surgery. A bit weird, but nothing stands out. Weird as in opposite interests and shy where my sister was outgoing. Never would have expected it from him, until I had to clean out their place and found a bunch of guns and crap load of knives and shit. I spent 3 months on a study abroad with Special Forces ex-FBI guy named Joe. We were a small group of mostly students, whereas Joe was older and there as part of a foreign immersion training for the military. He was a little odd or awkward at times and didn't share too much about himself, which we mostly attributed to the age difference. I described Joe as very intense but kind-hearted. The military was very important to him, and he always seemed very focused on that. But occasionally he'd make a dry joke or let his guard down for a moment with the group. He was very into photography and shared lots of great photos from the trip. He was also somewhat the protector of the group, and we always felt completely safe with him. One story I'll share was when he was walking over a bridge and spied some guys in the trees waiting to jump down and rob him. He pulled out a large knife he carried on him and casually brandished it as he walked by. The guys smartly decided not to mess with Joe, but after he crossed, he saw them sprint across the bridge and hide behind a building. 2 policemen showed up shortly after, and Joe showed them where the guys were hiding so the police could arrest them. Anyways, a few years after we got back, I heard news that he had killed someone and took his own life. He had been training for a new position, and his commander deemed that he wasn't physically fit enough for the job. The judgment effectively ended his career, and he felt he had been unfairly judged. He brought a gun into the base and shot his commander dead, then killed himself. I played basketball with a guy a few years ago in high school. Tried to find him on Facebook, and turns out he was being tried for murder. Apparently, he and some of his friends were looking for pot money, so they broke into this guy's house, and somehow the guy ended up dead. Everyone in his group said he pulled the trigger, but he denied it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I can say that he was a genuinely nice person when I knew him. Never would have expected him to kill someone, but I guess my mom was right about hanging out with the wrong crowd. Yes, was hired at the same time as him, worked right next to him for several years. He was one of those stoner guys always bragging about the parties he went to. He was a little obnoxious in a bro sort of way, so I always skipped hanging out with him after work. After I left that job a little while later, he killed his ex-girlfriend while her 5-year-old was in the apartment watching TV. Took the kid on a road trip to Texas and smothered her on Christmas morning and left her in a suitcase on the side of the road. Boy, a couple of years my minor in high school, he was always the outcast in his classes. He was dressed funny, talked funny, and said disturbing things that some recall as threats, mostly to the girls of the school. After graduation, he ended up butchering a homeless woman he was, I can't say living together or in a relationship with. I'm not sure what their status was. Either way, kitchen knife, drained her into the tub. In court, he showed no remorse and was proud to have finally ended someone's life. His father was my professor in university. He took it very hard. My aunt was a surgical technician who worked closely with Michael Swango, the killer doctor at Ohio State's hospital. She said he had very poor bedside manner and didn't seem even slightly concerned when his patients were in pain. He would often bring in food for the other staff, and people would mysteriously get sick after. He eventually got exposed after the roommate of one of his patients or victims heard him inject a lethal dose of medication into her IV and told the woman, "When it gets your other arm, you will be dead." By the time he was found out, he had already fled the state. My aunt and several of her coworkers were interviewed by what they were told was the state medical board, but it was actually the OSU board of directors. There was a large cover-up from the university to protect their university, and Swango was allowed to kill over 100 more patients before he was caught. There's a really good book about Swango and the cover-up called Blind Eye. My aunt was interviewed for the book, and said it is the most accurate description of killings and the politics that allowed him to keep killing. One of my best friends, when I was stationed at Fort Bragg, ended up getting into some sort of drunken altercation later on in his career at Fort Hood, went back to his house to retrieve a pistol, went back to the party, and shot a dude. It was absolutely insane to me when I heard about it because he had never shown any tendencies toward violence when I hung out with him pretty much every day for over 2 years. Probably drank a little too much, but he was always just a good dude raising a good family. Last time I talked to him was 3 days before his trial. He ended up changing his plea to guilty to receive 25 years instead of life. He's at Leavenworth now, going on probably 7 or 8 years now. Feel bad for the family of the guy he shot. He was a medically retired vet and didn't deserve to be gunned down like that. As much as the murderer was my friend, he gets to go home one day. The guy he shot never will. My neighbor's father murdered his entire family and then killed himself shortly before he was to be indicted over a Ponzi-esque scheme. I knew the whole family well. The dad was always a little weird and would do things like wear a full 3-piece suit to a child's soccer game. Never showed any signs of being violent though. The mother and 2 daughters were wonderful people. It was a real tragedy.